Before I begin today, I want to say a few words about the tragedy that occurred in DeKalb yesterday. I had a chance this morning to talk to President Peters. Obviously, he's devastated. The campus is devastated. My thoughts and prayers go out to the families of those who were killed, those who were injured. 22 men and women were shot, 7 were killed when a madman walked into a lecture hall at Northern Illinois University and opened fire. I told the President that obviously make my office available if anything could be done to help deal with the situation with the families and ongoing investigations and discussions about improved security. We hear about heartbreaking, mindless acts of violence like this day after day and week after week. They come in and out of the headlines, and after a while most of the world goes on, but for all the loved ones who are left behind, the pain and sorrow, I can only imagine remains for a very, very long time. So today we offer them our thoughts and prayers, but we also have to offer them our determination to do whatever it takes to eradicate this violence from our streets, from our schools, from our neighborhoods, and our cities. That is our duty as Americans, and that's our solemn obligation as mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, sons and daughters, neighbors and friends. On another topic, the federal chairman, Ben Bernanke, said this economy could get worse before it gets better. He talked of sluggish growth and weak consumer confidence, as well as a housing crisis that could deteriorate even more, and we know that there are also discussions about the problems with bond insurers and the concern that that will further constrain our credit markets. Now, Chairman Bernanke's forecast is reflected in so many of the stories that I've heard in Wisconsin over the last week and all across the country over the last month, several months. Families that can't pay the mortgage or their medical bills, or are worried that they won't be able to send their children to college. All the while, ExxonMobil reported record profits, $11 billion in one quarter, and we still have CEOs making more in 10 minutes than the average worker makes in 10 months. In some cases, we have the same people responsible for the subprime lending going off with golden parachutes while people are facing foreclosure. We are not standing on the brink of recession because of forces out of our control. This was not an inevitable part of the business cycle. It was a failure of leadership in Washington. Washington, where George Bush hands out billions of tax cuts to the wealthiest few year after year after year. Washington, where politicians tout NAFTA as a success when they're in the White House and then call it a mistake when they're on the campaign trail. Washington that has thrown open its doors to lobbyists and special interests who riddled our tax code with loopholes that let corporations avoid paying their taxes while middle-class Americans pay more. I spoke in Janesville on Wednesday about my comprehensive agenda to help struggling homeowners and prevent foreclosures, to provide a middle-class tax cut to workers and seniors, to make health care and college affordable, to protect families from bankruptcy and credit card debt, and to create millions of new jobs by investing in renewable energy and rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. Yesterday, Senator Clinton unveiled her latest in a long line of slogans, which argues that she's proposed solutions while others have not. I don't want to get into sort of the tit for tat here. All of us have proposed plenty of solutions in this race. On some we differ, on many we agree. But the problem is not the lack of good ideas, it's that Washington today is a place where good ideas go to die. They're the victims of petty, partisan politics, point scoring, and special interest influence that's out of control. So the real question in this campaign is, who can change that? Who can break us out of the gridlock? Who can take good ideas that will help working families in Wisconsin and across the country, build a consensus, overcome the special interests, and actually get something done? Now, after defending Washington lobbyists as people who, I quote, represent real people at a debate in August, Senator Clinton said yesterday that she would take them on as president. But in this campaign, she has taken nearly double the amount from lobbyists than any Democrat or Republican running for president. That's not being a part of the solutions business. That is being in the business as usual business. And that's what we're trying to change so that we can finally take on the special interests, bring people together, and pass the solutions that all of us have outlined in this campaign. That's what will make a real difference in the lives of working families who are struggling in this economy. That's what I intend to do as President of the United States. With that, let me take some questions.
I think that the shootings in Illinois and other shootings we've seen are a reason for revisiting our gun laws, and if so, what specifically would you have in mind?
Well, I think that we have to get a handle on the violence that's been taking place. And I've said before and continue to believe that doing a more effective job of enforcing our gun laws, strengthening our background check system, being able to trace guns that are used in violent crimes to unscrupulous gun dealers so that we can crack down on them, closing gun show loopholes, those are all, I think, important items on the agenda. I note that there was a discussion today about a law that's just been passed in California that allows micro-tracing of bullets that have been discharged in a crime so that they can immediately be traced by AFT. This is something that California's passed over the strong objections of the NRA. There may be, I think Senator Kennedy and Congressman Becerra have proposed the same legislation at the federal level. I think that's the kind of common sense gun law that gun owners, as well as victims of gun violence, can get behind.
Senator?
Yes, sir.
You often tell audiences that by electing you, they would have someone that not only knows the Constitution, but has taught it. I wonder, on this issue, what are your thoughts on the Second Amendment? If you're reticent to go after more bold steps in gun control, is that constitutional or not?
Well, I believe that the Second Amendment means something. I do think that it speaks to an individual right. There's been a long-standing argument among constitutional scholars about whether the Second Amendment referred simply to militias or whether it spoke to an individual right to possess arms. I think the latter is the better argument. I think there is an individual right to bear arms, but it's subject to common sense regulation, just like most of our rights are subject to common sense regulation. And so I think there's a lot of room before you start bumping up against a constitutional barrier for us to institute some of the common sense gun laws that I just spoke about.
Senator Obama,
yes.
Did you comment today on Vice President Cheney signing on to the measure that about 55 senators and 250 Congressmen passed about upholding a ban? They want the Supreme Court to strike down a ban on handgun laws.
In Washington, D.C.?
In Washington, D.C.
You know, I don't want to comment too extensively on what Vice President Cheney said and what these others have said because I don't know. I haven't followed their statements. I think that Washington, D.C. obviously has been plagued by violence like many cities in the country. I think that local jurisdictions have the capacity to institute their own gun laws. The Supreme Court will settle the issue. But the city of Chicago has gun laws, as does Washington, D.C. I think the notion that somehow local jurisdictions can't initiate gun safety laws to deal with gangbangers and random shootings on the street isn't borne out by our Constitution. But we'll see what the Supreme Court decides.
Senator, this confusion about support of Representative Lewis for you, can you clarify that?
I think you need to talk to Jeff Zeller. I have not spoken to Congressman Lewis. I hadn't spoken to him prior to this report. I put in a call to him after the report to find out what he was thinking. But I have not received word from him yet. But I think the broader point is that there are going to be a lot of superdelegates who are examining this race as it moves forward. I think increasingly the superdelegates that I talk to are uncomfortable with the notion that they would override decisions made by voters. And so, our position has always been clear, which is that the voters should make these decisions. Whoever has the most pledged delegates at the end of this contest should be the nominee, and that superdelegates should ratify that decision by the voters. I know that Senator Clinton feels differently. We'll see how the argument plays itself out.
Do you think his support indicates any kind of tipping point that he's reached?
I think it's premature for that. I think people are still looking at the contest.
Senator, on the superdelegates, if Governor Janet Napolitano or someone like her who supported you, but Senator Clinton won the state, if she asked you for your advice, what would you do in that situation? How would you advise her?
My understanding is the superdelegate system was set up for a scenario in which nobody had reached a majority, but there was a clear winner among the voters. And so the key was to close the gap. That was the point. If I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, this came up with Mondale Hart, where Mondale had the most delegates, most pledged delegates, but he was still technically short. The superdelegates were to provide a system to go ahead and put him over the top. That's what the superdelegate system was designed to do. It wasn't designed to override the decisions of the pledged delegates. And so, essentially, our belief is that the superdelegates should look at the original function of and what their role was, and that whoever ends up being that person with the most delegates earned through primaries and caucuses, that person should receive the support of the superdelegates. So that would be that is our position, and it's one borne out by the intentions of the original rules setting up superdelegates.
It's an inconsistent argument, right?
No, not at all. Why is it an inconsistent argument?
If someone like Governor...
So your argument is that it should be done state by state?
I'm asking you your...
Or it could be done congressional district by congressional district. I mean, there are all kinds of ways of slicing and dicing it. The general point, though, is, I think we should look at who the vote goes to. And whoever the vote goes to, that's where the superdelegates should.
What about the popular vote?
Well, I'm happy to take a look at the popular vote as well. Obviously, we feel pretty good about where our popular vote is right. Go ahead.
You were getting a couple of key union endorsements yesterday and today, and I'm wondering if you can explain why you think it is that the union candidate in some of these past contests hasn't really done well. You've got culinary endorsement. John Edwards has significant union backing in Iowa. Can you explain that?
Well, I don't think that unions are monolithic or all-powerful, but I think they are extraordinary forces in the Democratic Party, and they represent working people who are struggling every day to pay the rent, send their kids to college, and hang on to the health care they've got. So I'm very proud of having the Food and Commercial Workers Union. And we'll see, that's the only official union word that we received. If we get other union endorsements, we welcome it. The reason I think that they're moving in our direction is they recognize that we had the opportunity to build the kinds of coalitions that will strengthen the union movement, that I've been 100% supporter of union organizing and getting people more engaged in the union movement, and that our economic agenda is one that is targeting people who are squarely in the middle class or trying to get into the middle class. And those are the constituents that those unions represent. So we're very pleased to have the UFCW. We hope we get more union support. But just because we get the support of a union doesn't mean that we have to stop working.
A follow-up on a separate issue. There's been some talk about Senator McCain giving up his Senate seat. Have you given any thought to whether you would keep your seat if you seek for the nomination?
You know, it's not something that's come up. Someone?
Senator McCain has been arguing using the National Journal rating system, saying that you're the most liberal and he's the most conservative, and he's using that to draw up invitations. Isn't there some truth to that?
Well, there's no doubt that Senator McCain and I have different political philosophies. Absolutely. And that's what hopefully we'll be debating in the general election if I obtain the nomination and he secures the Republican nomination. The National Journal ratings, I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical of, though, because apparently one of the examples that they use to grade how liberal you are is whether or not you supported an office of public integrity that would independently investigate ethics violations in the House and the Senate. The notion that that's a liberal concept, as opposed to a common sense concept designed to ensure the integrity of the Congress, gives you some sense of how these categories of liberal and conservative, I don't think, really work. And that's not how the American people are thinking. They want common sense solutions that are bringing people together, reducing special interest influence in Washington, and actually delivering for the American people.
Senator Clinton keeps hammering you on this debate issue of not willing to wait for what?
You know, this is sort of a curious argument. Since I keep on seeing on CNN them advertising the debate that's coming up next Thursday, another one that we're going to be doing in Ohio, after the 18 that we've had. So, you know, the notion somehow that we're not debating, I think, is just a distraction. And I think most voters know it, and I assume that most of the press knows it.
What's the harm of not having one before Wisconsin?
Because I have to talk to voters. You know, every chance I get to talk to voters, we're not only picking up support, but I'm also learning and listening and finding out from them what they're concerned about. And you know, the debate exercise is one that, you know, I think has become fairly predictable. I could make the arguments on behalf of Senator Clinton that she will make against me in the debate. We all know them. You guys could too. And I'm sure the same applies on the other side. On the other hand, when we have a chance to talk to voters directly, we have a chance to give them a sense of where we want to take the country. And that's my priority in these closing weeks.
Just to follow up on that, Senator, why did your campaign feel it was important to issue the rebuttal ad to Senator Clinton's ad concerning the debate?
Our general attitude is that anytime somebody goes up with something negative, we want to make sure that we respond to it.
Senator, you a year ago made something that was widely viewed as a pledge to make public financing during the general election campaign. It appears that that's been backed away from a little bit, or that's the way it's been interpreted on TV report yesterday, saying you're trying to have it both ways. What are your intentions with the public financing?
What we did was we wrote to the FEC to find out whether or not we could opt out in the primary and then still participate in the general. And it's because of that query on our part that we were able to get this advisory rule. If I am the nominee, then I will make sure that our people talk to John McCain's people to find out if we're willing to abide by the same rules and regulations with respect to the general control. But it would be presumptuous of me to start saying now that I'm locking myself into something when I don't even know if the other side is going to agree to it, and I'm not the nominee yet. So we're trying to get through this process. As soon as we do, then I assure you, my folks and John McCain's folks will sit down and see if we can arrive at a common set of ground rules. Yes.
On the delegate question involving Michigan and Florida, what is your current position on what should happen? There's obviously been some talk about a compromise. And are you personally engaged in talking with the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not personally involved in it. This is something that I think the staffs have been working on. Look, all we've done is try to abide by the rules as they've been set out. So the DNC made a determination that Michigan and Florida, shifting its primaries, had violated an agreement that had been made. They asked us not to campaign there. We abided by that rule, and in fact, I didn't even have my name on the ballot in Michigan. Obviously, it wouldn't make any sense. I think even my 6-year-old would understand it would not be fair for Senator Clinton to be awarded delegates when there was no campaign, and in one of the states at least, my name didn't appear on the ballot. On the other hand, I want to make sure that the Michigan and Florida delegates have a means of participating. There are probably a whole slew of different solutions that could be come up with that would both achieve the interest of making sure that Michigan and Florida delegates participate without skewing the delegate count for either candidate. And I think to the extent that we can work something out like that, that would make sense. All right.
Do you worry about disenfranchisement of those folks in Michigan and Florida?
I mean, I think that the notion that somehow folks who understood that these, well, let me say it this way, the parties and the officials in those states understood what the rules were ahead of time. And all we've done is try to abide by the rules. But I want to make sure that eventually those folks have a chance to participate.
Your campaign is really focused on the youth vote. How has the youth impacted you?
You know, I've just been incredibly inspired by all the young people who've been getting involved in this campaign, not just the vote, but the volunteers who are filling up our offices, knocking on doors, making phone calls. I can't tell you how many parents tell me that they changed their minds because their daughter or their son talked to them. I think the youth votes had an enormous influence on this campaign, and it's making, I think, us older folks optimistic about the future to see how engaged young people are.
Senator, Milwaukee has a pretty serious crime problem like a lot of urban areas. Yesterday there was a big bust here of almost 40 gang members in one roundup. What kind of assistance do you think the federal government needs to be providing to local law enforcement so things like that can continue happening?
Well, I think there are a couple of areas. Number one, we should reinstitute the COPS program that put police officers on the streets in local communities. And I thought that was a good initiative by Joe Biden and the Clinton administration. Bush stopped the process. It needs to be reinstituted. There are other ways that we can provide assistance in rural areas where the methamphetamine crisis has gotten out of control in some situations. Burns funding, which allows local communities that don't have enough resources to set up their own drug task forces, are able to pool with surrounding counties and go after that problem. I think funding is always important. And as what I mentioned earlier about our capacity to trace bullets and guns that are used in crimes so that we can stem the flow of illegal handguns that are landing on the streets, that can be extraordinarily important. But one of the things that I continually talk about is moving aggressively to deal with the lack of opportunity and poverty in many of these communities can also play an enormous role. If we're investing in early childhood education, as I've proposed, if we're improving our schools by paying our teachers more, giving them more support, instituting after-school programs and summer school programs so that young people have positive places to go and can participate in a constructive set of activities that gives them some sense of what their futures might be like. All those things, I think, can contribute to lessening violence. Now, ultimately, parents have to parent. We as our community, in these communities, have to say we have zero tolerance for violence and there's no excuse for it. But the more we can give a nurturing environment to children, I think the less likely we are to see these kinds of problems of chronic street violence.
Last question.
Senator Clinton yesterday attacked you specifically for, I guess, she's accusing you of basically caving to special interests. I want to read some of her comments yesterday. She said, you told people you stood up to the nuclear industry and passed the bill against them, but that you actually let the nuclear industry water down your bill and it never actually passed. She that on top of that, the same company that watered down the bill lobbied for Dick Cheney's energy bill, and you voted for that energy bill with its billions of dollars of tax credits for the oil industry. How do you respond to that?
Well, it turns out that Senator Clinton, who voted for this bill that I introduced and touted it on her website, thought it was pretty good then. You know, only in Washington can you vote for a bill, take credit for it, and then criticize the sponsor of the bill. And I think that Barbara Boxer, the ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, indicated the degree to which we made every effort to have the strongest bill possible. Nobody else was dealing with this issue. And the only reason that we didn't get the strongest version of the bill was because Jim Inhofe, the Republican chairman, wouldn't allow it. So, as often happens, we ended up getting more than was in place before, not as much as I originally would have liked. You know, this is, you know, I understand that, you know, Senator Clinton periodically, when she's feeling down, launches attacks and as a way of you know, trying to boost her appeal. But I think this kinds of gamesmanship is not what the American people are looking for. What they're looking for is ways to actually help send their kids to college or find a job or get help. And that's what we've stayed focused on in this race. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been doing pretty well over the last several weeks.
Thank you. On that energy part, I mean, in your stump speech, you often hold it up as, you know, trademark piece of bad legislation that Cheney met with the energy companies, the oil and gas companies 40 times, that with the environmental groups once, as though this is the epitome of bad legislation, and yet you voted for it.
Well, well, what I said at that time, and I was very clear, was this was a flawed piece of legislation, but that the investment in clean energy, alternative energy, wind, and solar was the best that we could do right now, given the makeup of the Congress. And those are the decisions that we always have to make. I wrote about this in my book a year ago, or a year and a half ago. You know, this is the problem with the Senate or the House. You get these log roll bills where there's good elements of it and bad elements of it. And at the time, those bad elements of it, I was very clear that they were bad and that they needed to be removed. And I intend to make sure that we get a smart energy policy in place when I'm President of the United States. All right? Thank you, guys.